Hello, welcome everyone to this session on how ICT companies can play a role in meeting Europe's ambition of net zero by 2050. So I have a very distinguished panel with me, with whom we will discuss some of these challenges. Everyone knows this climate challenge is unprecedented, and we have to take an action matching the challenge. And in order to do that, ICT companies have a very important role to play. We will explore this role in two different dimensions. First of all, looking at what ICT companies are doing themselves in order to meet this ambition, as well as how they can play an important role in other sectors as well in order to reduce our carbon footprint and save our planet. So I would introduce the session panelists as well. I'm Mohammad Imran. I'm a professor of communication systems at University of Glasgow. I have with me distinguished panelists Gabrielle Guinier, Head of Environmental Sustainability with BT. And we have Matt Spelbeck-Sharp, who is Head of Sustainability in Ericsson. And we have Owen Griffith, who is Head of Sustainability for European Middle East in Facebook. So welcome everyone to this panel. So maybe I can start with Gabrielle, with yourself. You and BT, what are you doing in order to meet this ambition and challenge?
Yeah, I think so. For BT, climate action is not something new. We've been on a climate action journey for about 30 years. We set our first carbon reduction target already in 1992, and that was really before companies started thinking about carbon reduction. We set our first science-based target in 2008. Again, that was before people started linking carbon reduction to science. That target was to reduce our carbon emissions by 80% by 2020. We met that target 4 years ahead of time in 2016. So coming back from Paris, we decided to be even more ambitious. So BT was the third company in the world to set a target aligned to 1.5 degree pathway, which means that we're going to reduce the carbon emissions of our operations by a further 87%. Already have done 80. We're going to do another 87%, and we're going to be net zero for our operations by 2030 and 2040 for supply chain and customer emissions. And we're actually doing really well on that journey. So we already have halved our emissions, not by 2030, we've actually already done it. So we've reduced our emissions by 57% since 2016-17 and supply chain by 19% since then.
That's fabulous, excellent. So if I can come back to you, Matt, as you are a customer to BT as well. So what are you doing and how you fit into this?
Well, I think at Ericsson we really have a value chain approach. So we work very close with our customers and with our suppliers. But before that, we start with ourselves. So starting with ourselves, really getting our own house in order is essential. And as you heard from Gabrielle, we have been more or less working very close to each other already from the early 90s, in fact, and on the same journey. So we also have since 2016, reduced our emissions with 57%, and or if you take a couple of years earlier, I think it's 70% or something like that. So demonstrating that it's possible in a way to do it. And I think for us, it's a lot about if everybody would take off, I mean, our scope 3 emissions is partly in Gabrielle's operations of their networks, and the other part is upstream supply chain. So we share the same scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, but everybody would solve their 1 and 2 all the way, then we would be safe, and that's much easier than understanding the full value chain, I think. So from our perspective, it's really truly about a partnership on the value chain, but taking care of your own.
That's great, and this can only work if it is end-to-end and everyone is doing their part and making their contribution. So from Facebook perspective, Owen, so would you like to add something?
Yeah, well, I think what's immediately sprung to mind for me is that Facebook, or Meta, as I should really be calling it, is a much younger company than BT and Ericsson, I'm realizing, and I think it sounds like your sustainability work started before we were even a business, but I joined, a year and a half ago, just before we announced our net zero target. But really, we've been working on this stuff since We first built our data center back in 2000, our first data center back in 2011. But really, I think in the last year and a half, 2 years, have completely kind of ramped up our sustainability progress and ambition. We're now 100% renewable energy. We've got an ambitious net zero target for 2030, and we're adding additional areas, targets, strategies around water and increasing focus on how we engage our users as well. So we're sort of at the kind of the other end of the ICT world to these guys, but I think we can kind of contribute a lot in that process and that journey.
That's great. So it seems everyone is trying to do their effort in this regard. So just for the audience as well, that there are questions and answers. If you have any questions, you can just look at the Slido codes on this site, and please post your question on Slido. So we will take up the questions as well as we go along. So moving to the second part of our discussion here as a panel, if we look at the big question of how ICT companies and digital connectivity that ICT companies are enabling, how that plays a role in other sectors in bringing down the carbon footprint and the emissions in other sectors. So maybe I can start with Mats, with you, if you have any perspective on this.
I think it's important to understand that the ICT sector, I mean all of us together as a whole industry globally, we are responsible for 1.4% of the global carbon footprint. So a pretty small industry. And it's also electrified to 80%, using 3% of the electricity in the world, but buying 45% of all power purchase agreements. So really pushing the renewable energy as an industry. I think that is sort of the framework, starting from 1.4%. But Ericsson Research, and that we have been working together with Johan Rockström and academia, as well as civil society organizations like WWF and the Food Program, on a report called Exponential Roadmap Report. Mm-hmm. And in that report, we have looked on the role of ICT. And the ICT sector can reduce climate impact by 15%. Okay. Totally. And that's, if we talk about halving by 2030 as essential to reaching the 1.5 degree pathway, then 30% of that halving, or 1/3 of that halving, can be done through existing solutions in ICT. And then we have also done other studies recently where we demonstrate that adding 5G on top of that, we can address another 5%, so 20% of the total impact. And that's also aligned with, for instance, GSMA, the industry association of our sector, having said exactly the same numbers. So it's several reports that come out that demonstrate that ICT sector is really essential in transports. We cannot electrify transport. We cannot increase the amount of renewable energy in the grid without connecting the grid, having a smart grid, using ICT and 5G to really get the latency and the fast, otherwise the power will fluctuate too much and we will not get stable power in the grid. The same goes for smart buildings. I mean, we talk a lot about retrofitting buildings and changing insulation and windows. That will take time. But only connecting the existing ventilation and cooling and heating systems, you can reduce 15 to 20% of the energy consumption of the building right now. So I think that the other part of it is that we can buy us time using digitalization to bend the curve fast. And that will buy us time for the things that will take longer time, like cement or steel or air travel and so on. So I think this is not really understood and utilized enough. So that I think is sort of the picture of the ICT sector.
Very impressive and very promising as well in these bleak times when everyone is concerned about the environment. This gives some hope. So just one question, follow-on question, if I may ask. All these gains you mentioned, are they net gains? So of course there will be some energy consumption of ICT sector itself, for example 5G and other technologies. So what we will save, is it the net gain?
That is also really interesting because Ericsson has collected data. We are a very engineering-driven company, so we are a bit nerdy on our numbers. So we have been doing life cycle assessments and collecting data from the whole industry sector. And we just now, a week ago, collected the data for 2020 from the sector. And we have a coverage of about 75-80% primary data on subscriptions. I mean, covering more or less all the networks in the world, 75% of the networks and data centers of the world. And what we can see is in Europe, the energy consumption has gone down with 3% between 2018 and 2020. The traffic has increased 77% at the same time. So the link between traffic in the networks and the data centers and energy is not there. There is a total disassociation between that. In US at the same time, it has gone up by 1.5%. So I mean, that's sort of balanced out by the European reductions. And at the same time, we see in Europe that the renewable energy has gone from 40% to 60%. So, as I said earlier, driving the renewable energy as a sector much bigger than our own sector, in fact. Also in sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of operators that are present, they are building solar farms that they use to power the countries. And presently, it is the regulation in the countries that are stopping them from doing more of that. So, for instance, Orange and also Vodafone, I know, they are building solar farms in South Africa, in Jordan. They are trying to build it in Egypt, where they cannot do it because of subsidies of fossil fuels and so on. So, I think that as a sector, it's really taking a big responsibility and has broken the curve, except for China, I must say, where there is a 12 to 15% increase during the same period of time, and there is no renewable energy. So if we take global picture, it's a small increase, but the carbon footprint has in fact shrunk totally from the whole sector.
Yeah, I hope every section, every region, every sector plays their roles to bring it down. So just we discussed about this need for end-to-end, and supply chain plays a very important role in ensuring that this carbon footprint reduction comes end-to-end. So Gabrielle, could you please let us know how that really fits into this picture?
Yeah, so if we look at BT's end-to-end carbon footprint, I think we're a typical operator. So 5% of our end-to-end footprint is from our own operations. 95% is either from supply chain or customers using our products and services. So if we're looking at, how are we going to reduce this? How are we going to get to net zero on supply chain? We really need to engage with our suppliers. And at BT, we're doing that in several ways. So we have introduced a new climate contract clause. So basically, when key suppliers sign a contract with BT, they also sign a requirement that they need to reduce the carbon emissions of their company over the term of the contract with BT. And I think what has changed with that is that you're not only having sustainability departments talking to each other, you're actually talking to procurement, you're talking to contract people, and it becomes a lot more of a serious conversation. We've had our chief procurement officers write out to our key suppliers and say, have you set a net zero target? Are you buying 100% renewable electricity? Are you talking to your suppliers in turn? And if they're not doing, if they don't have a net zero target, if they're not buying renewables, we actually contact them afterwards and say, what's the problem, basically? What are the barriers? How can we help? And why are you not on this journey with us? Because it's very important to us. So I think using, as a customer, using our purchasing power to work with suppliers, 15% of our adjudication criteria is down to human rights and sustainability performance. And we've also worked with the likes of Ericsson, Telia, Unilever, and IKEA to set up the 1.5 supply chain leaders. Basically, we're trying to work together, share best practice, and we launched a guide this week, basically to talk about how companies can come on the journey, how they set a 1.5 degree target, what they need to do, and we've also been working on the SME Climate Hub. I think it's becoming more important not just to look at your key big suppliers, but we need to start reaching scale in this conversation. So how do we reach out to the smaller businesses around the world? And the SME Climate Hub is all about tools and ways of getting on the journey for smaller businesses. So if you haven't seen it yet, please look up the SME Climate Hub or 1.5 Supply Chain Leaders.
Yeah. Indeed, and all of this discussion actually points to one important fact, that at the end, individuals, they have to take their responsibility as well to make an impact. So who would be the better individual, like the youth force, which can actually address this challenge? So, how is Facebook engaging with youth in order to make this change?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the number one question we get from when we meet our stakeholders. Of course, we have our net zero plan and we have our operational strategy, and then they go, okay, yeah, that's fine, but what are you doing on the platform? Because they recognize that we have this really unique position to, I think, inspire people and maybe create some change. Over 3 billion monthly active users on our platform. So that's a really powerful position to be in, and we really recognize that. I think the company was sort of inspired by the success of our approach to COVID-19, which was sort of how can we get people authoritative information as much as we can. So the COVID-19 app and information that we pushed out was really success, and we followed that model with the Climate Science Centre, which we launched, I think, September 2020. Summer 2020. I know because it was 6 weeks after I joined, and it was a really steep learning curve for me. So that's really about putting climate science information in the Facebook app in people's hands and sharing as much as possible. We worked with the UNEP, with IPCC, with UNFCCC to develop that approach and see what we can do. And I think, giving information is just one part of the journey. We were talking a lot yesterday with some colleagues about what's the sort of theory of change, and I think our position is really like, okay, we can give people that information, we can get that scale that kind of Gabrielle mentioned, but now we have to figure out how do you turn information into action, which is sort of going to be the next part of our journey. And we're experimenting with different things in that too. We just started working with SME Climate Hub. We're looking a lot at like how we can engage users, but what we do know is people respond to very different parts of the sustainability journey. So some people would be very inspired by carbon and reducing their carbon emissions. Other people would be very interested in biodiversity, nature and stuff. So we know we're probably going to have to develop multiple different tools to speak to all those sectors across Europe. But you've seen from Facebook and Instagram and the youth strikes yesterday that people on our platforms are just really engaged, and I think quite positive. I feel it's a positive that they're using our tools to mobilize and organize and march and demand change.
Okay, that's excellent. So from the audience as well, if there are any questions, just a reminder, we have Slido details here, so you can log on to Slido and post some questions. So in the meantime, I come back to the panel and just let's discuss some of the barriers and how we can overcome or bust those barriers. Either they are regulatory or financial, or that ICT sector or companies face in order to go on this mission or on this pathway. So maybe Mats, if I can start with you, if you see any barriers to this?
Yeah, I mean, we are in the EU pavilion right now, and from a European perspective, we talked about the importance, the difference of the existing solutions on the 4G platform and where we are today on what we can do, and then what 5G delivers as sort of an additional opportunity and to scale things faster, even faster. Then I am worried about Europe lagging severely behind Northeast Asia and US when it comes to 5G. In fact, I think that what we see is that in North Korea, 95% people coverage, Europe 10-15% people coverage of 5G currently. So a huge gap, and also an investment gap. So I think that both creating a policy change of sort of understanding that digital infrastructure is infrastructure. If we take one example, in Italy, to build 5G, to start invest in the infrastructure of the future, you had to pay 6 billion euros upfront for a license. Yeah. So you have to start by giving away a lot of money to the government before you can start investing in the infrastructure of the future. And of course, you don't have the same amount of money left. So if they would instead have requirements that said that the one that builds fastest and best coverage would get the license, then the money would stay there and you could invest much more money into building the infrastructure instead of paying sort of a pre-tax to be able to invest. And I think that is just an example of how strange the digital infrastructure is seen. And I mean, to be perfectly honest, Facebook sort of wouldn't exist without innovation happening on the 4G platform for consumers. And that is the same for Google or Spotify or others. I mean, all of that was an innovation. And also Apple iPhone wouldn't exist without that. So that is sort of the platform of innovation was the 4G. Now, the same thing will happen for industry on 5G.
Yeah.
And you can think, I mean, we have the Facebook and the Googles and all of these companies coming from the West Coast of US, and you have Alibaba and the others coming from China and Northeast Asia. But there are very few from Europe. So we sort of missed out on the 4G platform by being late. All this innovation will not happen within 5G. 5G is sort of already set what it should be, but on top of that innovation platform for industries. So I think that, of course, I mean, if you build a racing car and don't have a highway, I mean, you cannot test it. So there will be no racing car from places where there are no highways. So if you don't have the highway, if we don't build the infrastructure, the innovation will not happen in Europe. So we will lose jobs, we will lose a lot of opportunities and innovation power. And still we are arguing who should build 5G and is it the right standard and so on, and how do we get this going and how do we release the frequencies. I mean, the target for EU is have 5G by 2030. If this is the solution, that's way too late. We have to have it by 2025 by latest. Yeah. So I think that is my key concern, in fact, to treat the digital infrastructure as an infrastructure that we invest in, both for jobs as well as for the environment.
Indeed, and I agree with you. I think we don't have to wait for a killer application in order to provide that infrastructure. Sometimes it works other way around. Bring in the infrastructure and the application will follow. So over to you, Gabrielle, if you want to add something.
I think, and just like Mats, we've been to a number of these COPs, and I think we're not going to tackle climate change without tech, without ICT, and we're core to the solution. And to me, it seems there's a lot of focus on the hard to abate sectors. We talk about steel, we talk about agriculture, we talk about cement, but where are we talking about how ICT can enable this transformation? And I think there's not enough talk about what we're going to do, because if we're going to tackle climate change, we need all these digital, smarter solutions, which is going to make society a lot more energy efficient. For example, a lot less travel, a lot more intelligent. And I think we need to start having those conversations.
And I'm glad that this has started somewhat here. Yes. So over to you, Owen.
Yeah, I think picking up on Matt's comment about digital infrastructure being seen as infrastructure is really true. I think particularly for us, when we know that so many businesses around the world, for example, I think 200 million businesses use Facebook every, if you use Facebook to run their business. So actually you have to think of it as how essential are, a strong connected services like that in running that much bigger ecosystem. So it's not even really just about us, it's about the businesses that rely on WhatsApp and Facebook and Instagram shopping or whatever it is. So I think that's really key. And then to Gabrielle's point, there's a lot of, I think, narrative in the EU around how we can reduce our sector's emissions. Well, actually, I think that there are slightly bigger wins to be got elsewhere. But I think us as an enablement service to those harder to abate sectors is the way to look at our industry. Now, I think there's some positive stuff in the EU Green Deal, and we're watching to see what comes out of that. But I think some of the perception needs to shift, because actually we have this amazing different platforms and tools, and the investments that we're making in connectivity across the industry is what's going to enable it's going to enable net zero 2050, isn't it?
Indeed, and just looking at, because this is a European Union event as well, so is there a role this European Union can play in order to accelerate or facilitate this ambition that we are discussing here?
I think definitely. What we see is that the focus from the industry when we talk about 5G is very much on the consumer devices. But I said this is the innovation platform for industry. And I think that to create an open platform for the industry innovation, to simplify the data sharing and other thing within that, and also pure investment in development of chipsets for 5G is important, because the focus from us, a lot of focus from operators and others are on consumer centric business. Also, the chips manufacturers are focusing very much on mobile phone chipsets and not the ones for industry. So they will come later, and we need them much earlier. And I think EU could take a leading role. They could sort of. There is a lot of talk about getting IC industry back into EU. Why not start building the chipsets for the industry and create that platform and be ahead of the curve on that instead? Because then they can sort of jump that and gain 3 to 4 years, because that's what we see on the chipsets for industries is 3 to 4 years away. And if we would start building them now, we could get them out in maybe 2 years. So I think that from that perspective, you could sort of go there, and there is a window of opportunity right now. So I think that would be a very interesting thing to talk about. Instead of trying to copy the things that are already happening, do something different. That's the blue ocean strategy for EU.
And I think as well, us as an industry and when working with policymakers, I think there's a lot more that we can do to demonstrate the use cases. So we haven't, I think, probably been good enough at saying this is how we enable carbon savings in other sectors. And all of us need to get better at that together.
That's excellent. So is there any barrier coming from regulation, you think, from Facebook's perspective, that should be overcome?
I think we're watching what's coming out of the Green Deal and different and the different parts of the EU. I think brought it at a very high level. It's quite good to see this framework emerging. We know what we can engage with as things come out of it. We're supportive, of a framework. It gives the continent something to start with, and it's the most ambitious plan, we've got globally. And I think from our perspective, what we're positively seeing is, we again going back to that piece where we can kind of engage and inspire Facebook and Instagram users across Europe. You've got things like the EU Climate Pact, which is sort of, I call it the sister initiative of the Green Deal. It's a way of engaging citizens in Europe, and that to us is a great sort of platform for us to engage with the EU separate to the regulation side, because we can try to aim to help amplify and share those messages. And I like that the focus isn't just entirely on the regulation. Of course, that's what's going to get us to reduce emissions to net zero, but that there is a citizen engagement piece, because that really speaks to how we can play a role as well.
Great. Mats, you have something to add?
I think one thing that is missed, and that's really an opportunity missed from the EU taxonomy side and from how digitalization works, and that's the realization of dematerialization, because the taxonomy is very much focused on improving something. But if you take away something, that's not counted. So if I improve an oil car to a better oil car, that's an improvement through the taxonomy. But if I take away the car through a digital solution, that's not counted. And I mean, think about music industry or camera industry. Peak Kodak was 1990. After that, in 5 years, 75% of all films for photos were gone out. In 10 years, it was gone. And the second wave of digitalization of photos were sort of, you had the digital cameras booming at the same time, of course, because that was killing the film. And the second generation, all simple digital cameras went away because you use your phone to take the photos instead. So that's sort of the 2 steps of digitalization. The first step is improving and changing the structure to another thing. The second part is really taking away and changing the whole business model. And those 2 steps goes across. I mean, that was the same with music industry. First, you had the music player, the iTunes and your iPod and so on. And then the second one was you use your phone, or you use Spotify or your computer or Sonos or another device to sort of listen to music, and you can stream as much, you can use as much as you like. There is no footprint or very, very small footprint and no sort of acceleration. And I think those things would not be captured in the taxonomy. So the taxonomy doesn't sort of take care of the biggest gains, where we are really dematerializing and taking away the total food. The best material use is not to use materials, in a way. I mean, to take it fully digital. Exactly. So I think that is not counted in the taxonomy, and I think needs to think about how to get that into the framework and also into the NDCs. I mean, digitalization should be part of all NDCs, and they are not today. So I think that there are sort of gaps of understanding how this industry works and how it really drives change.
And I think to a slightly wider point, so the UK government announced this week that all UK financial institutions and companies that are listed on the UK Stock Exchange from 2023 are going to have to publish their climate transition plans. So I think we see a lot of pledges, we see a lot of companies, we see a lot of countries saying, yes, I'm going to be net zero by whatever year, but what are you actually doing? What's your progress? And I think for us at BT, and I think it's been very important that people are completely transparent about how are you doing? What are the barriers? How are you going to get there? Because if we don't publish this kind of stuff, we're not going to know how we can work together to solve these. So I think being completely transparent about how you're going to get to your net zero targets is very important, and that's a wider EU issue or a global issue that I think we need to start thinking about.
Yeah. As we wind up the session, still, if there are any questions from the audience, please feel free to post them on Slido, and I will take them in a second. In the meantime, let's just come to some call for action. If we want to say in one-liner or two-liner, what would be the most important area that our sector should focus on in order to achieve this net zero ambition?
I'm trying to think on my feet here. I don't know. I think what we've tried to kind of demonstrate is that it's not necessary. I guess the call to action is sort of just to, not sounds a bit maybe just to be recognised actually of the role that we can play in that enablement position. And yeah, I like that what you were saying, Matt, about what have we already removed already just by virtue of building and growing this digital ecosystem that other businesses and industries can rely on. So maybe there's just something around, let's start recognizing that, or maybe a job for us, as you say, to better quantify. I know that we haven't done that piece of work yet. So yeah, maybe an interesting partnership opportunity in the future.
Indeed, and I would add that maybe expediting the digital infrastructure, right? Because as Matt was pointing out as well, that it could actually make a big change. We don't have to plan in that sense that we have to find the application and then produce the infrastructure. If we produce the infrastructure, maybe we can skip some of those intermediate steps, as Matt, you were pointing out, which actually require material and create a carbon footprint on the environment. So if we have good digital connectivity, maybe we can reach the right solution in one step and miss a lot of unnecessary steps as well. Anything you would like to add, Matt?
No, I think you just stole my final punchline. So so from that perspective, I see digital infrastructure as what it is, and treat it like an infrastructure. And the second part is really to realize that this is the easiest way to break the curve fast, because if you think about how fast changes go when industry go digital, I mean, media industry was the first to go. I talked about music, but also, I mean, all printed media. 20% of all paper in the world has sort of been gone away from the printing, and that's a sort of a fixed dematerialization of paper in the media industry. So I think that those two things are build the infrastructure and secure that you count also the gains as a total.
Great, Gabrielle.
I think for us sitting here, I think we need to use our brands and our influence to get more people, more companies to join us on the journey to net zero. But I'm also going to call an action for those of you here, those of you, watching this. We all actually have individual influence and responsibility. So, what you've seen here, you're here at COP. Go out there, talk to people about net zero and what needs to be done.
Excellent. So I think we would bring it to a close at this point, and I'm very, very grateful, thankful to all the esteemed panelists. So Owen, Matt, and Gabrielle, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts on this one. And thanks to this wonderful audience as well who were here to listen to our discussions. Thank you.